Alright everybody, welcome back. So because the US clearly didn't have enough premium attackers, Gaijin went ahead and added yet another rank 7 premium attacker, and this time it's a premium Harrier. This is the AV-8B Night Attack, and it comes at rank 7, and of course that means it's $70. If this seems familiar to you, well that's because we already have a later version of the AV-8B in both the US and Italian tech trees, the AV-8B Plus. They do have some small flight performance differences we'll get to later on, but they fly relatively similarly. The big difference is going to be in their weapons capability, and the biggest isn't air-to-air. The immediate thing you'll notice is that this lacks a radar, and so that means that it also lacks the AIM-120 AMRAAM, which does give it a pretty significant hit in terms of its air-to-air capability. The sidewinders you get access to are also downgraded, going from the AIM-9M to the AIM-9L, which means that you no longer have IRCCM and it's no longer smokeless. So if you play Sim, you no longer get stealth pistols, and just for normal ARB, they are much less effective because they can be relatively easily flared. Although of course it does just depend on aspect and what type of flares the enemy has. Now, in exchange for these two downgrades, you have a much lower battle rating. So the normal AV-8B Plus is up at 13.0, which makes sense. This is all the way down at 11.3, and this puts you in a much more favorable matchmaker. The only way that you can face active radar homing missiles now is if you get into a full up tier like what you see right here, and then it's only stuff like the Phoenix and the Fake-Core 90. The AIM-9L is a solid missile for this battle rating. I mean, at 11.3, you're still going to be fighting a lot of stuff that only has rear aspect IR missiles, so getting a potent all-aspect IR missile like this is a nice advantage, even if it's not as amazing as it used to be, because most of the stuff you're fighting out does have flares and is actually able to counter you, which is good. Flareless stuff should not have to routinely fight AIM-9Ls, although if I cut to a down tier here for a second, it does still happen. And then you get stuff like this poor F-105 right here, which has an AIM-9L fire to him at 5 kilometers front aspect. And the only chance he would have had is if he managed to take it head on and to fire a missile or a rocket or something like that to flare it. Unfortunately, neither him nor this F-4C managed to do that, and so they both just eat a missile and a head on. That's the exception rather than the rule, because most of my games when I was playing this thing, I was getting up tiered into at minimum 11.7, if not 12.0, and every once in a while 12.3. And that brings me to my next point, which is that flight model wise, this thing really isn't the best. Now, don't get me wrong, it has one of the best Harrier flight models. It has the 2nd gen wings, just like the GR7 and the AV-8B Plus. So compared to other Harriers, you are going to be better in a dogfight. But it is still a Harrier in most of the time a 12.0 or maybe a 12.3 lobby, and so your flight model is just not going to be the best. You're going to be slower than almost everything else that you're fighting, so if someone doesn't want to engage you, they can just run away. This thing also pulls insane amounts of AOA, so you have to be careful whenever you're trying to engage in a turn fight not to bleed away all of your speed all at once. Now, if you like delta wing planes or other planes that pull a lot of AOA and have a lot of, nose control, at least in the vertical aspect, this thing is going to be great for you. My one complaint when it comes to getting gunshots is that it rolls very easily and sometimes it likes to overroll. And the rudder isn't bad, but it likes to whack out on me sometimes, especially when it is doing that overrolling I was mentioning. Compared to the Tech Tree AV-8Bs, it does have a weaker engine, as you can see, but it is also lighter, so it kind of compensates for that. Unfortunately, I can't show you a comparison chart between the two just yet because the bot isn't up to date, but I anticipate it's relatively close in terms of thrust to weight. So, you know how I just mentioned gunshots. Well, the AV-8B has one of my favorite guns at top tier, and that is the GAL-12 Equalizer, which, by the way, is an incredibly sick name. But it's a 25mm Gatling gun, unlike the 20mm Vulcan that we're very used to. It's kind of a middle ground between the Vulcan and the Avenger, and so it also has less ammo than the Vulcan, but it does a bit more damage on individual hits. Now, personally, I found I get more hits and crits overall just because the fire rate is lower, and so I have less shells impacting, but this is still a very competent gun. And fun fact, whenever we get the F-35 in-game, probably in a few years, that will use a 4-barreled version of this gun, at least the ones that actually have a gun. You're also very well equipped to be on the defensive with a modern RWR that has full launch detection capability, including against JDAM, which is really crucial whenever you have, MiG-23s flying around. And you also get a whopping 180 countermeasures, which is very, very good for 11.3. Most of the stuff at this battle rating has 60 countermeasures. Of course, the Phantoms are flying around with 90, but you get double what the Phantoms get. This entire time, I've been talking about AR-B, but if you ask me, the place where this thing really shines is in ground RB. This thing is an absolute menace at 11.3 for ground. You get a wide selection very similar to what the AV-8B Plus offers, with one new weapon, which is those AGM-65E2s, which are just laser-guided Mavericks. Now, personally, I have not found much use out of these. They are incredibly slow. You have to maintain lock the entire time. I get a lot more use out of the Fire and Forget Mavericks, because that way I can use them to take out SAMs, for example. And if I have one of them engaging me, I don't want to sit there having to try and maintain lock the entire time, worried about rolling, like you saw right there. When I rolled a little bit too much, my laser was gone. If I was using the laser Maverick there, and let's say that was a SAM, I would have been boned. But, I mean, hey, the option is there. Now, the bigger thing, in my opinion at least, is the fact that you still get that 10 paveway loadout. Now, personally, I would never bring the full loadout of 10 paveways. I think it's much better to bring a couple Mavericks for those Fire and Forget stuff that you need, and then you still have 6 paveways after that. So you go from possibly 10 kills down to 8, but you get much more versatility out of it. This is great cash to the battle rating, and especially because it also lines up with the 11.3 M1A1 clickbait, which I have a feeling was very much intentional on Gaijin's part. I have a feeling some of y'all are screaming at your screen right now, asking, hey Lee, why aren't you talking about those shiny new JDAMs? And well, it's because for ground RB at least, they're pretty much useless. Now, we did not get the laser-guided JDAMs. We got the GPS-guided, only GPS-guided ones. And so what that means is that once they drop off the aircraft, they can't track moving targets. They target a specific point on the ground. And one thing about tanks in War Thunder is that they often don't just sit in the same spot for a solid 30-40 seconds. I could maybe see a use case for this if you know that somebody is camping a specific spot or like a small region. Let's say maybe you target, 3 in like a small area around where they're moving around and just lob them off from a long distance. But for the most part, I think you'd be much better served just dropping in a paveway or a Maverick and locking onto the target. Maybe if there is a SAM that is sitting motionless in spawn, which does happen quite often, that could be a use case for it. But for the most part, like I said, I don't see much of a use for it. Now, in AR-B, I can see it being used to more easily bomb bases, but there'd be a moderate quality of life improvement, if at all. Now, as for what the video is actually all about, whether or not this thing is worth a nice solid $70, well, first of all, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think any pack in this game you should spend $70 on. If you're gonna get this or any of the other premiums, I'd recommend waiting for a sale, which there will be one coming up relatively soon in like late October, early November for the anniversary, so keep an eye out for that. Now, as for the other rank 7 vehicles, or even the one rank 8 premium that you could buy, personally, I would definitely get this over the A6E. Maybe over the F4S, depending on your playstyle. I'd probably go for the F4S just because it does have that nice solid loadout of AIM-7Fs, but I wouldn't say the AV-8B would be a terrible choice. Now, out of all the ones I mentioned, I would probably still say the F5C is my favorite out of all these as a rank 7 premium, even though it isn't as good as it used to be, because it did get moved all the way up to 11.0 and is now the same battle rating as the F5E for some reason, because Gaijin doesn't know how to balance their game. Regardless, it's still solid, teaches you a lot of the fundamentals of jets, and is the cheapest out of this bunch at $65 for the pack. If you bring ground RB into the mix, if you're a tanker as well as playing air, then easily, if you ask me, by far the best decision is going to be the AV-8B. The F5C only gets bullpups for its guiding munitions, the F4S gets nothing guided, and while the A6E does get, its paveways and it gets the funny skipper, the load of this thing is just incredible. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what y'all think in the comments down below, and look forward to my next video coming on up, and I'll catch y'all next time, so peace, y'all.